the question here becomes, if we have groups that have radically different views of justice and cannot or do not seem to want to adapt to a system that at least prizes itself on a kind of neutrality, what is going to happen? So how can we be tolerant? How can we tolerate more? So the question is, when we hear that we should be more tolerant, the question is, more tolerant of what? And also the other question I would put forward is, should we be intolerant of anything? And if yes, of what?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'd say about this. I'd say to start with, we have to rethink what we mean by the social contract, and kind of take it down a peg or two away from abstract philosophy. I mean, not that I have anything against philosophy. That's what I do, right? So I'm all in favor of philosophy, but a hyper philosophized version of the social contract would be a Rawlsian version or a Kantian version, or a version in which we can a priori set out kind of all of the ground rules in advance of how we're going to conduct social life or civil life. And I think I have a more kind of rough, kind of a get down and dirty kind of version of the social contract, where you have to basically go out there and you probably, talk to people, talk to representatives of groups, and figure out a mutually acceptable, way of managing your problems, the problems that have to be addressed in the public square. And I think that can't really be done if we lay out a very rigid kind of constitutional vision before we start to talk to people. And so laïcité and the valeurs républicaines, the républicains, so these Republican values that are talked about in France, if you put them down on the table and say, that's our starting point, you're automatically going to not be able to talk to a lot of groups. You won't be able to engage with them. So I'm not saying all bets are off. I'm not saying we should just be relativistic. I do think that we need some basic principles of, like, say, non-aggression. There has to be some kind of idea of peace in order to negotiate and in order to talk to people. But I think that a lot of the details need to be worked out in the dialogue.
Yeah, I was going to say there, but then I was going to say that, don't you think that to a certain extent is a surrender already to other cultures, or those cultures that are inimical to the way we view things? Then, well, you did add then that there still should be some sort of starting point. I'm I may be slightly more or slightly less sanguine, I should say, about where we are right now, because to me it's this constant feedback loop of diversity causing enforced centralization, and enforced centralization causing even more resentment to the state, and so on, where there was sort of a negative spiral, or a vicious circle. So I don't necessarily share that optimism. Well, you didn't say you were optimistic exactly. Actually, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think I probably tend more in the direction of a particular culture having to be the sort of how shall I put it, the dominant culture, if you will, and there certainly can be room for other cultural expressions within the dominant culture. Certainly, I mean, I myself have been a stranger in many countries, so I've been a beneficiary of that for sure. But I think that there must be a dominant form. Otherwise, I don't think the society can stand in the long run. So I may be slightly more pessimistic about our prospects in that regard.
Can I just say on that point that I don't really know if I qualify myself as an optimist or a pessimist, but I think in regard to existing political structures, I'm profoundly pessimistic. So, for example, the approach that it's a very general kind of approach, but anyway, where dialogue should not presuppose too much in terms of, a moral philosophy or a political philosophy that is pre-given. I think this approach I'm proposing would only work in a decentralized society where you really have genuine federalism. I don't think that in a centralized state like France, this would work, partly because of the administrative rigidity, the rigidity of the rules of the public administration. So in other words, if we were to just hold constant the centralized state, then I do think we're screwed under that arrangement. I just don't think there's any exit out of that. That will descend into, I think, some form of anarchy or disorder, and it's only a matter of time. And so there are only two possibilities. There are two possibilities I see. One is the state just, digs in and says, we are the state and we're going to stick to our guns. And in that case, we are going to see a downward spiral because that rigidity is not rigid structures cannot handle these sorts of problems of pluralism. Or two is that there's some kind of crisis within the state that forces some form of decentralization, like, say, a part of the state splitting off or, something like that. And then there might be, after that crisis, there might be a little more flexibility and there might be a little more decentralization. And that would be, for me, desirable, even though it might be costly in the short run because of there would be some instability because of that process.
Yeah, no, in that case, yeah. So then we actually do agree more than I initially thought. Then actually, yeah. So I see it very similarly. That's one thing I like about the United States. Of course, we certainly have our problems here, no question about that. But the genuinely federalist structure of our country, I think, is an advantage. In Germany, they have a nominally federalist system, but practically it's not federalist at all because all of the Ministerpräsidenten and so on, the various state governors, they all agree with each other anyway on everything. And so there's no point to their federalism because they have this sort of groupthink. But here in the United States, we do have genuine federalism, and one really experiences these cultures as one travels through the country, vastly different cultures. I mean, I fly from New York to Paris, and there's less of a cultural difference than if I drive over to Ohio or something. So that is I think an advantage. Our problems come from the fact that people try to negate this federalist system. When you have people in California who cannot accept that people in Florida live differently, that then leads to this sort of enforced centralization, and that would be a problem. But as long as we're able to preserve our federalism, if we will be, that would certainly be that would go toward what you were saying, and I think would be helpful.
I want to go back to the idea of a social contract and tie it with something that I think everyone said in the beginning, that it is more a cultural crisis that we're facing than an institutional one. So my point with a contract, my question is that let us suppose we go down on community levels, we engage in conversation with people and try to devise a new kind of contract within quotation marks. The question is, what kind of possibility is there in enforcing the contract? Because an increasingly centralized state would be a state that would care less and less about what many people want. Because, for instance, a lot of the time we hear about various unpopular policies that the state is imposing. So the question is, even if we try to go down this road of going back to the communities and try to negotiate a kind of contract, is there the cultural background that is necessary to defend that contract and enforce it, and actually pose a kind of threat to the government that does not honor its own conditions. Because it seems to me that the notion of a contract is involves several conditions that power must hold in order for it to be legitimate. So when the state is acting against that contract, its rule and its authority is illegitimate. And the question is there a cultural background to support and to actually show that the people are fed up with a centralized state that doesn't care about what they are saying? Because we could say that by just engaging in social contract type conversations, there could be a facade of caring about the people. The question is, what would happen, and whether Westerners do have it in them to show that they deeply care about the state honoring its agreed upon conditions.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.